Welcome back to the courtroom, everybody. We've got a very exciting program this afternoon because it isn't always that you get to talk to a member of each branch of government in the Connecticut state government. And today you have that choice. And I know that you have some prepared questions that you want to ask of our guests today. And so what we're going to do is jump right in. I'm going to have each guest introduce themselves, just telling you their name and what their position is. And then I'm going to call on each school one at a time to ask a question. And we're going to just keep asking questions until our time is up. So think about spreading it out among the branches. We have legislative, executive, and judicial represented here. So we'd like to learn about each branch. So we will first do introductions, and then I will ask you to ask your questions. Would you like to introduce yourselves to our friends?
Hello, can you hear me? Good morning, buenos días. Okay, gracias. My name is Hilda Santiago. I'm a state representative from Meriden, and I've been a legislator now for 12 years, going into my 7th term. When I'm finished, it'll be 14 years. So thank you for being here.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Eric Russell. I'm the state treasurer in Connecticut, so I'm a part of the executive branch, and I've been in this role for 2 years. I'm just starting my 3rd year as treasurer.
Thank you very much. Okay, we have 3 schools here with us. We have Chase School, Benny Dover Jackson, and Helen Street. So let's start with Helen Street School. Do you have a question to ask? Ms. Tabor's coming with her microphone, and you can stand up and ask your question.
I'm right behind you.
Hello, my name is Ezra, and I come from Helen Street Elementary School. My question is about the executive branch. What does the governor look for when appointing judges?
What does the governor look for when appointing judges? Great question. So I think one that each governor probably approaches this a little bit differently, but I think what they're evaluating is experience. So there are attorneys, right, that could be working in a lot of different spaces that may apply to be judges. And so they're looking at experience and background, right? Some people may be working as a prosecutor, some people may be working as a defense attorney, some people may be in private practice somewhere. And so I think it's evaluating their experience and their background and what they're going to add to the bench to make sure that they're going to be a good and impartial judge. And I would leave this to Judge Everly as well if you wanted to expand on it, but just so you know the process, the governor in Connecticut would nominate someone to be a judge, and then they would have to go through the legislative process and be approved to actually become a judge.
If I could just add to that, in order for the governor to appoint anyone to the bench, they must have gone through the Judicial Selection Commission first. There's a long application they fill out, and then they have to go for an interview. The Judicial Selection Commission is appointed through the governor. It is comprised of 6 attorneys and 6 members of the community, and they make a decision whether someone should be put on the list. Once you're on the list, doesn't mean you're automatically appointed. There are many people that have been on the list over 20 years and have not been appointed, but the governor can only select people from that list. So to try to get some of the politics out of the system for selecting judges. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And let me just add that. The governor appoints, so they go on the list. We have to approve the list when it comes before the legislature. So there's 187 of us, 151 in the House of Representatives, and 36 in the House of the Senate. So we all have to approve the judges, and they usually get appointed for 8 years, and then at the 8 years, they can be reappointed. As a matter of fact, we're coming in next Tuesday to approve a whole bunch of judges that just went through the Judiciary Committee and the Selection Committee in order to become judges.
Thank you very much. That was a wonderful question. It brought in all three branches. I love that because it shows how they all work together for the good of Connecticut. Next, let's have a question from Benny Dover Jackson School.
This question is for the executive branch. What's it like handling money for the state?
So the question, what's it like handling money for the state? So one, it's a really important job. We have about $260 billion that comes through the state every year. And I'm responsible for managing that cash and making sure that we have all of the money that we need to pay our bills on time. We also have about $60 billion that is in our pension fund. So it's how we make sure that your teachers and that state employees and retirees have money when they're done working, right? So that they can still take care of themselves. So I manage all of that money. And then it's also how we invest in the state, right? How do we make sure we're paying for new schools and that we're paying to fix the roads and to build bridges in our state? How are we paying for things like housing and childcare facilities? And so it's really interesting work. I really like it. It's how we make sure that we are doing everything we need to do to continue to take care of people in the state. But while I'm managing that money, the legislative branch is who actually decides how we're going to spend the money that we have in the state. And so that budget process is done by the governor and the legislature.
So just to add to that, like the treasurer just mentioned, the bills have to be put in every 2 years. So we approve a budget for the state of Connecticut every 2 years. Like he said, we decide on how much money the schools get by town, how much money the police might be getting, the firemen, how much money to pave the roads. So that's all decided in a budget that we have to approve by June. So we work together in order to spend the money. So I sit on the finance committee, so it's my job, our job in the finance committee to find the money in order to spend it. And then the appropriations committee spends the money. So we find the money as far as taxes and other ways to look for it, and then the appropriations committee spends it.
That's great. Thank you very much. Another wonderful question. Thank you. Those were great answers. Now let's have a question from Chase School.
Hello, this is for the executive branch. What are you doing to make schools better for kids?
Can you repeat that one more time?
What are you doing to make schools better for kids?
Did you hear it?
What do you do to make school better for kids?
To make school better?
Yes.
That's a great question. So this is another space where the legislative branch and the executive branch work really closely together, right? It's a really good question. A lot of this starts with our budget process, so it's through the governor's office, through the legislature, deciding how much money we're going to be investing in schools, right? And so that is all done through the budget. What we try to do big picture in the state is, through my office directly, is helping to build new schools as we're putting money into and supporting municipalities when your city or town wants to build a new school. But it's also how much money is going into help run those schools and the financing that comes along with that. It's a space that Connecticut, we continue to make a lot of investment in education because we know how important it is for you all now, but also for the long-term future of our state. And we work really closely to make sure we're meeting the needs that schools really have from a financial perspective. The other piece is that we have a state board of education where some education policy gets set on the state level. So what goals are you trying to meet to reach for your school, right? how we're going about things like testing. So a lot of those things are happening between the executive and legislative branch as well. And then in touch with your local school districts too.
Thank you. That was another good question. Thank you very much. Now we're going to throw it back to Helen Street School if you have another question.
This one is for the legislative branch. What made you want to be a state legislator?
Good question. I wanted to help people. And I started off first at the local level at the city council. I was there for 8 years. And then in 2012, the state rep from Meriden retired to run for Congress. And so then that was an opportunity for me to run for state representative. And I already have been involved in Meriden for many years. I did a lot of door knocking, making phone calls for people to come out to vote, because it's really important for people to come out to vote. So you have a district. I'm in the 84th district. We have, like I said, 151 legislators, and we all represent the town or city, and some of us represent 2 or 3 towns. But in Meriden, I only represent 1 district. And I just thought it was the next level to be able to make decisions and bring back money to the city of Meriden to make sure that our money wasn't cut in the budget. So it's basically also helping people with state issues, like if they applied for a program at the state level and they didn't get the help, then they can call me, and I would call the State Department and make sure that that person is getting help. So it's basically about helping your constituents and making sure that the services that the state provides in different departments helps them. Because if they get help, then I'll get the credit for getting voted for. So, because you have to come out to vote. So, so that's a good question.
Great. Thank you very much. Now we're going to go back to Benny Dover Jackson School, and if anybody's got a judicial question, that would be great. So cute.
My question is for the judicial branch. Do you have to be a lawyer first? Do you have to be a lawyer first?
That was easy.
That was too easy, but good answer. And now we go back to Chase School for a question.
What is the most interesting case you've worked on?
Thank you for that. When you're sitting as a judge, if you stay around long enough, you get to serve on all different possibilities that you can sit on. You sit on housing, civil, criminal, all different areas of the law as a judge. So for many years in Danbury, I sat on juvenile court. And experts for the parents said no, these were not recent fractures. They were healing fractures, and that all of the fractures occurred during childbirth. So then they brought in the doctor who was a obstetrician from Stanford, who had been in practice 35 years, and he testified that in 35 years, this was the most difficult birth he'd ever had. So when the baby was stuck in the birth canal, and when that happens, there are emergency procedures. There's basically 5 steps that doctors can go through to extract the child from the birth canal. And he said he went through all 5. None of them worked. So he was at a last-ditch effort. He put both hands in and pulled as hard as he could. And the child was saved. He basically saved both the child's life and the mother's life by doing that. So the decision was I had experts on both sides testifying differently, which happens in many trials, but a lot of times you don't have that many. We're all highly qualified. You know, the #1 doctor who testifies in DCF cases came in. I had one of the doctors for the parents who was the chief surgeon at the hospital, special surgery, one of the finest hospitals in the world, testifying. So, you know, when you're sitting in juvenile court and you have a decision to make, you don't want to ever put children in a difficult situation again if they've had one. On the other hand, there are legal standards that you have to follow. And one of them is that to terminate parental rights, it has to be one of the highest burdens of proof that we have, both clear and convincing evidence. And bottom line is, I ruled, after hearing all the evidence, I ruled that the state had not proven by clear and convincing evidence. In my own mind, I was convinced that these injuries did come from childbirth. So I awarded the children back to the parents, but I can tell you that I checked, I sat in Danbury for 5 years on juvenile court, and then thereafter, as I traveled throughout the state, hearing different cases, every year I checked back in Danbury to see if there was ever any other problem with the parents, and there never was. The children, one of the children has graduated college now, and the other child, I think, is about to graduate college. And they did quite well throughout their career. So that was my hardest case.
Thank you very much for sharing that with us. I think it shows the importance of looking at all of the evidence and understanding that people can interpret things in different ways. But I think that it would be true of each branch of government. You have a lot of things that you have to consider and a lot of decisions to make. So that's a really good question because it really reminds us of all of the important issues that arise and how our officials deal with those issues. We are nearing the end of our time together, but I would like to, I think everyone's had 2 questions so far. Every school has had 2. Does anybody have a really compelling question, a really question that they just really want to have answered before we end our time together? From any school. You can just raise your hand back there.
My name is Castillo, and I have a question for the executive branch. Can the governor get arrested if they commit a crime?
Good question. Can the governor get arrested if they commit a crime? The answer is yes. In Connecticut, the governor can be held accountable for committing a crime. And then what's a little bit different is there's been a lot of talk about this on the federal level with the president right now. But in Connecticut, the ability to pardon someone, so to get rid of a conviction or a crime, has actually been delegated to, we have a board of pardons and paroles in Connecticut rather than the governor making that decision on their own. So the short answer is yes.
Interesting question. And I think we have time for one more. And I think somebody back there, you had a question that you really wanted to ask.
What do you take into consideration when making laws?
Oh, okay, good question. We take a lot of things into consideration depending on what the law is about. So if it's about, let's say we passed the law a couple years ago in the last session to make the lollipop the state candy. Everybody hear about that? So that was easy, right? So everybody agrees with that. But sometimes you don't think it's easy because somebody might have put in a bill to make ice cream the state dessert or candy. So it depends on how the bill is brought to the chambers. So when the bill is brought to the chamber, that means that at least it came out of the committee. There's a long process. It came out of the committee. And then it goes on a docket, and then they bring the bill out. Now, both sides, the Republican side, has a chance to say what they feel about the bill, and then on the Democratic side, they have a chance to say how they feel about a bill. And everybody has their argument, their debate, and then if it's because the Democrats are in the majority now, it's easy for us to pass a bill without the other branch, without the other party. But it's always good to make sure that you pass bills that are bipartisan, right? That both parties agree on. I think that it all depends. Let's say, for example, the minimum wage. That was a big one, right? We raised the minimum wage a few years ago, and now it's up to $15.69. But when that bill came out, I would say about 6 years ago, the debate was for almost 10 hours. So everybody some people were against it and some people were for it. So you have a debate. So between the two parties, the two legislative parties, they decide on how long the debate is going to be. So that was one bill that it was a long debate, but we still passed it. So the state of Connecticut has a higher minimum wage than a lot of other states around the country, right? Because the federal minimum wage is $7.25. So we want to be able to start young people, like if you're going to work at McDonald's or you're going to work in an office or you're going to work at Home Depot, that you start with a good wage so that hopefully, or you work in a doctor's office, they usually start you off minimum wage, so that you'll make good money in order to stay in the state of Connecticut. One thing is that Connecticut is a very expensive state. So in order to survive in the state of Connecticut, you now have to make almost $27 an hour for a family of 4. And most of the time, the mother and the father have to work in order to pay bills. So raising it up to almost $15.69, because now every year it's going to go up, it helps people to find better jobs. So it all depends on what the bill is. Sometimes it takes 10 minutes to pass a bill, and other times it takes 8 hours to pass a bill, or 10 hours. The biggest bill that takes the most time is the budget. We have to pass a budget every 2 years, because if we don't pass a budget, then nobody gets paid in the state of Connecticut. The schools, the Board of Ed, we don't get paid, the executive, the judges, nobody gets paid. So we have to make sure we pass a budget every 2 years. So that debate usually takes like 8 hours, 6 hours between the two people, the two bodies in the chamber. And then at the end of the day, at the end of the debate, then we all vote for the budget, because we have to make sure that the money that's at the state level and the money that the treasurer keeps at the treasury is funneled down to your local city government and your local Board of Ed. So that's what my job is to make sure that we vote on a budget that's hopefully bipartisan but also that the money, that everybody gets paid at the local level, because we can't do the snow plowing, we can't pave roads, we can't fix anything in your town if you don't get money. Now, there's other ways to raise money, because at the local level they have property taxes, but you always need help from the state in order to pay for a lot of the services in your town. So that was a good question.
That was good, and you can see everything that has to be considered by people in state government. And now we're going to move you on to your next part of your program, but let's first really show our appreciation for these three leaders who have shared with us.